The world was still processing Germany's shocking announcement when the next blow came, not from Berlin, but from Ouagadougou. Just hours after Chancellor Marcus Keitel declared that all arms shipments to Israel would be halted, Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré stepped before a crowd of reporters. His voice was calm, but his words struck like thunder. "If Netanyahu starts a war in Africa," Traoré said, pausing to lock eyes with the cameras, "we will strike him back." The statement traveled faster than any missile. Within minutes, headlines flashed across global news outlets: Traoré threatens Netanyahu with retaliation. The timing could not have been more explosive. Germany's embargo had already placed Netanyahu in a political chokehold. Now, an African leader was openly daring him to cross the line. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu's war cabinet convened in haste. Screens showed Traoré's image frozen mid-sentence, his eyes hard as steel. "He's overstepping," Netanyahu growled, slamming his fist on the table. "This is not his fight, until he makes it his fight." But in Ouagadougou, Traoré saw it differently. To him, this was his fight. Israel's shadow operations in resource-rich African regions had been whispered about for months. Intelligence reports suggested that Israeli contractors were mapping out mineral routes in West Africa under the guise of security partnerships. Traoré had warned his allies in the African Union, but few took action. Now, with Germany cutting off weapons, the balance of power was shifting, and Traoré intended to seize the moment. At the presidential palace, his closest advisors urged caution. "Mr. President, Netanyahu will not take this lightly. His reach is long," said Foreign Minister Amadou Zita. Traoré leaned forward, his voice steady. "And ours is longer than he thinks. If he fires the first shot here, the last shot will be ours." The room fell silent. Outside, the evening call to prayer echoed across Ouagadougou. Somewhere in Tel Aviv, a message was already being drafted to test Traoré's resolve. The stage was set for a confrontation the world had not anticipated. The reply from Tel Aviv didn't come in a press conference, it came through back channels. A coded message intercepted by Burkina Faso's intelligence service carried a chilling phrase: "If the lion roars, we'll cut its tongue." Traoré read the translation without blinking. "So they think we're prey," he murmured. "Let's show them we have teeth." In the war room beneath the presidential palace, large maps of Africa and the Middle East glowed under dim lights. Red markers indicated suspected Israeli intelligence outposts in Africa, communications hubs, training camps for private contractors, and disguised mining operations. Each was now a potential target. "Mr. President," said Defense Minister Salif Ouedraogo, pointing at a coastal marker, "we have verified that Israeli agents have been using this port in Sierra Leone for arms smuggling into West Africa. It's the spine of their operation here." Traoré's eyes narrowed. "Then we break the spine." But Traoré wasn't just planning military countermeasures. His strategy was layered: economic, political, and psychological. Hours after the Israeli message was intercepted, Burkina Faso began diplomatic calls to sympathetic nations. In a joint statement drafted with Mali, Niger, and Guinea, they accused Israel of neo-colonial interference in Africa's sovereign affairs. The statement ended with a warning: "Africa is not Gaza. Here, the land fights back." The phrase went viral online. Across social media, African youth adopted it as a rallying cry. Videos flooded TikTok and Twitter showing street rallies in Bamako, Niamey, and Conakry, with protesters waving signs that read, "Africa is not Gaza," and "Traoré stands for us all." Netanyahu, watching from a secure command room, clenched his jaw. Every hour Traoré stayed in the headlines, Israel's image in Africa eroded. He needed to act, but any strike on Burkina Faso would risk drawing the whole region into conflict. Traoré knew this, and he was betting on it. "Netanyahu is a man who thrives on fear," he told his advisors. "So let's make him fear the cost of touching our soil." Far away, in a quiet compound in Dakar, a covert Israeli team was already receiving orders to neutralize the problem, before the problem neutralized them. Just after midnight, the presidential residence in Ouagadougou went into partial lockdown. A convoy of unmarked SUVs had been spotted entering the outskirts of the city. Within minutes, Traoré's head of security, Captain Idrissa Kaboré, burst into his private study. "Mr. President," Kaboré said, his voice tight, "we have credible intelligence that a foreign hit team has entered Burkina Faso. Their target is you." Traoré set down the pen in his hand. He had been reviewing infrastructure project reports, but his expression didn't change. "Where are they now?" Kaboré pointed to a live drone feed on the wall screen. The SUVs were weaving through back roads, avoiding checkpoints. They were moving like professionals, too professional to be a coincidence. "Netanyahu wouldn't send a warning without sharpening the blade," Traoré said calmly. "It seems the blade is here." Within minutes, an emergency protocol was activated. Elite units of the Presidential Guard sealed every major road leading toward the palace. Sniper teams took positions on rooftops. In the shadows of the garden, camouflaged soldiers moved silently among the trees. But Traoré did something unexpected. He refused to retreat to the underground bunker. Instead, he walked to the balcony overlooking the city, hands clasped behind his back, as if daring anyone watching to make a move. "If they've come for me," he told Kaboré, "let them see I am not hiding. A leader who hides invites the next attack." Meanwhile, in a safe house across town, the Israeli team was unpacking suppressed rifles and encrypted radios. Their leader, a former Mossad operative known only as Oran, briefed them. "We move at 2 o'clock. The objective is not assassination, it's extraction. We take him alive." The message from Tel Aviv is clear: humiliation sends a stronger message than martyrdom. Back at the palace, Traoré received a secure call from the Malian president. "Brother, we have intercepted chatter," the voice said. "They plan to take you, not kill you. They want you paraded in chains." Traoré's jaw tightened. "Then tonight," he said, "we chain their plans instead." At exactly 2 o'clock, the outer sensors along the southern wall of the presidential compound triggered. For masked figures moved like shadows, cutting through the perimeter fence with silent tools. From the control room, Captain Kaboré's voice came sharp through the earpiece: "Southern breach confirmed. All units, move." Floodlights blasted on, slicing through the darkness. The intruders didn't flinch. They tossed flashbangs toward the guard posts and surged forward. The first clash was brutal and fast: muffled gunfire, the crack of tasers, the thud of boots on concrete. On the balcony, Traoré didn't step back. He stood in plain sight, framed by the harsh white lights, an unmistakable silhouette. Through a sniper's scope, Oran saw him clearly. "Target in sight," he whispered into his mic, proceeding to capture. But the moment Oran's team advanced toward the main staircase, the trap was sprung. From hidden firing ports along the palace walls, elite marksmen unleashed a precise volley, not to kill, but to cripple. 2 of the intruders went down instantly, their legs torn out from under them. The others scrambled for cover, pinned. Kaboré's voice was cold steel: "You thought you were hunting a man. You walked into a fortress." A firefight ignited in the courtyard. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the thick scent of the garden's night-blooming jasmine. Muzzle flashes lit the palm trees like lightning. In the chaos, Traoré descended the steps himself, flanked by 2 guards, his boots striking the stone with deliberate, unhurried rhythm. He stopped just 10 meters from Oran, who now crouched behind a toppled planter. "You crossed continents to take me," Traoré said, his voice carrying over the gunfire. "But here, in my land, you answer to me." Oran met his eyes for a fraction of a second, and in that instant, he knew the mission had failed. The surviving intruders were dragged into the palace's lower security wing, wrists bound, boots scraping against the concrete floor. Their faces were streaked with sweat and dust, their breathing sharp from the adrenaline crash. Every camera in the corridor was rolling. Traoré wanted a record. In the interrogation room, the air was heavy with the scent of stale coffee and metal. The central table was bare except for a single folder and a steel water flask. Captain Kaboré stood in the corner, silent but watchful, while 2 intelligence officers flanked the door. Traoré entered without fanfare, closing the door himself. He didn't sit. Instead, he walked slowly around the table, studying each prisoner in turn. "You were sent to take me," he began, his tone calm but edged with something harder than anger. "But you failed. And now you will tell me who sent you, or you will disappear into a place where names are forgotten." The leader, Oran, smirked through split lips. "You think you scare me? I've been through worse." Traoré leaned closer, close enough for Oran to see the steadiness in his eyes. "I don't want to scare you. I want you to think. If I was dead, your mission would be over. But I am alive, and now your life depends on the truth." Oran's silence was his answer, until Caboret dropped the folder onto the table. Inside were photos, the team boarding a plane in Djibouti, intercepted communications, satellite images. "We already know," Caboret said flatly. "We just want to hear you say it." Finally, Oran exhaled slowly. "We were sent by Netanyahu's office. No intermediaries. Direct orders." Traoré straightened, his face unreadable. "Good. Then the message will be simple." He turned to the guards. "Feed them, keep them alive. They'll be traded back, with my words in their ears." The room fell silent, but the meaning was clear. Netanyahu would know Traoré not only survived, he controlled the board now. By dawn, the palace war room was lit with a cold, blue glow from the satellite screens. Intelligence officers whispered updates, tracking every news cycle from Tel Aviv to Berlin. Outside, the capital was calm, but inside, the situation felt like a coiled spring ready to snap. Traoré stood at the head of the table, flanked by his most trusted ministers. The captured mercenaries had given enough to confirm what he already suspected: this was no rogue operation. It had Netanyahu's fingerprints all over it. A communications officer nodded to him. "The secure line is open, Mr. President. Direct to Jerusalem. He's expecting someone else." Traoré adjusted the microphone, his voice steady but resonating with restrained power. "Prime Minister Netanyahu," he began, "I believe you lost something tonight, your men. They're alive. For now." There was a pause on the other end. Then Netanyahu's voice, sharp and dismissive: "You're playing a dangerous game, Traoré." "That's the difference between us," Traoré replied. "You play games. I fight wars only when I must. And if you think sending assassins into my land is not war, you're mistaken." Netanyahu tried to interject, but Traoré's tone cut through. "Start a war, and we'll hit you back, harder than you imagine. Burkina Faso will not be your Gaza, your chessboard, or your hunting ground." The line went dead. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Caboret spoke quietly: "You just told the world where you stand." Traoré's eyes stayed on the blank monitor. "No," he said. "I told the world where we all must stand." The news broke within the hour. Leaked audio of Traoré's words, sharp, defiant, unmistakable, spread across social media before the sun was fully up. The clip was just 20 seconds long, but it hit like a cannon shot: "Burkina Faso will not be your Gaza, your chessboard, or your hunting ground." In Ouagadougou, the streets erupted. Crowds gathered outside the palace gates waving flags, chanting his name. Vendors closed their stalls to join the marches, and drivers honked in rhythm with the slogans. People who had been wary of politics just days ago now spoke with fire in their voices. "He stood up to Netanyahu," one elderly man told a journalist. "That means he will stand up for us." Internationally, the reactions were polarized. Across much of Africa, leaders and citizens alike praised Traoré's courage. Hashtags calling him the voice we needed trended in multiple languages. In contrast, Western media anchors tried to frame the incident as reckless brinkmanship, while Israeli spokespeople denied any link to the mercenaries, calling the accusations political theater. But the footage of the captured men, faces bruised, uniforms unmarked but unmistakably professional, circulated alongside the leaked conversation. Analysts began to piece together timelines, flight records, and connections that pointed to something bigger than a theater act. In the Middle East, the statement struck a deeper chord. Palestinian activists hailed Traoré as a leader who said aloud what many feared to whisper. Even in some Gulf capitals, where public criticism of Israel was rare, social media posts quietly praised him. Inside the palace, Traoré watched the coverage with measured focus. "This isn't just about Burkina Faso anymore," Traoré said, standing beside him. Traoré nodded slowly. "It never was." In Jerusalem, the war cabinet met behind sealed doors. The leaked call had humiliated Netanyahu, not just regionally but on a global stage. Allies were calling for explanations. Opposition leaders accused him of losing control of Israel's foreign image. Netanyahu sat at the head of the long, glass table, his fingers drumming slowly, eyes locked on the intelligence chief. "If Traoré thinks he can challenge us without consequence, he's mistaken," he said. The intelligence chief hesitated. "Prime Minister, the problem is, the leak has shifted public opinion in parts of Africa and the Middle East. Moving against him now could backfire." Netanyahu's tone hardened. "Then we move in a way no one can trace. Economic choke points. Disruption of his alliances. Starve his projects before they take root." Plans were drawn in rapid secrecy, lobbying in Washington to cut development aid, pushing French and EU partners to freeze investments, leaning on regional neighbors to distance themselves from Burkina Faso. Simultaneously, cyber units were ordered to probe the country's networks, searching for vulnerabilities in communications, banking, and even the military grid. Within days, subtle ripples began to appear. A planned trade agreement with a West African bloc stalled without explanation. A shipment of construction equipment from Europe was delayed indefinitely. Anonymous news articles began surfacing, accusing Traoré's administration of corruption and human rights abuses, claims with no evidence but enough to raise questions. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré's advisors brought him the reports. He read them quietly, then set the papers down. "This is not an open war," he said, "but it is a war nonetheless." Maurice Sankara, leaning against the table, smirked faintly. "Then we fight it the same way, quietly, and where they don't expect us." Traoré's eyes narrowed. "Exactly. It's time we reminded the world that we're not just defending ourselves, we're building something worth defending." Traoré gathered his core team in the palace strategy chamber, a circular room where every wall was lined with maps, trade routes, satellite imagery, economic corridors. The air smelled faintly of strong coffee and tense resolve. "They're trying to starve us without firing a shot," he said, pointing at a projected map showing delayed projects and frozen accounts. "So we'll open new doors, doors they can't close." His plan unfolded like a chess match. First, accelerate talks with non-Western partners. Russia for military hardware, China for infrastructure investment, Turkey for advanced agriculture technology. Each deal would bypass traditional Western-controlled banking systems. Second, strengthen ties within Africa itself. "We stop thinking of ourselves as small nations standing alone," Traoré said. "We are a network. If they touch one, they face all." Messages were sent to Mali, Niger, and Guinea, proposing a new defensive and economic pact. Third, counter the propaganda war. Burkina Faso's media team, with the help of skilled independent journalists, began releasing a flood of high-quality documentaries showing the country's real development projects, community-led initiatives, and successful military defenses against extremism. Within 2 weeks, the narrative shifted. Hashtags praising Burkina Faso's independence trended across Africa. International influencers began questioning why the West was undermining a nation lifting itself from poverty without foreign chains. Netanyahu's network noticed, and grew uneasy. The economic isolation hadn't collapsed Traoré's government; if anything, it seemed to have made it more resilient. Maurice Sankara put it plainly during a late-night strategy session: "They tried to cut off your oxygen, Ibrahim. You built new lungs." Traoré smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting both fatigue and defiance. "Now, we don't just survive. We grow. And the more we grow, the more their fear becomes our shield." The sun was sinking behind Ouagadougou, casting the palace courtyard in gold. Thousands had gathered outside the gates, their chants rolling like distant thunder. Traoré stepped out onto the balcony, his figure framed by the warm light, the Burkinabe flag waving just above his shoulder. Cameras from across the world were trained on him. He raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. His voice carried through microphones, strong yet deliberate. They wanted to frighten us into silence. They wanted to make us kneel so they could call it peace. But peace without dignity is surrender, and we will never surrender. A roar erupted, but he lifted his hand again. "To those who threaten us, hear me clearly: Burkina Faso is not for sale, not for invasion, and not for intimidation. You may have bigger armies, bigger budgets, bigger headlines. But we have something you cannot buy: our unity, our will, our unshakable belief that freedom is worth more than gold." Behind him, on the palace walls, a massive projection lit up, a photo of the captured mercenaries, flanked by Burkinabe soldiers, alive but disarmed. "We do not seek war," Traoré continued. "But if war comes to our door, we will answer it. And we will not answer alone." In that moment, the crowd began chanting not just his name, but the names of allied African nations, one after another, as if forging a continent-wide oath under the fading sun. Somewhere far away, in a secure meeting room, Netanyahu watched the live broadcast. His advisors whispered about options, strategies, consequences. He said nothing. But his clenched jaw betrayed the truth: Traoré had not just survived the confrontation. He had turned it into a battlefield Netanyahu could not win. That night, as the crowd sang freedom songs in the streets, Traoré stood alone on the balcony, looking out at the horizon. "They will try again," he murmured. Maurice Sankara, stepping beside him, replied, "Then we'll be ready." And for the first time in a long while, both men allowed themselves a small, knowing smile. In the end, it wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. Traoré stood before the world and told those who threaten his people, "We do not start wars, but we will finish them." In a time when power is measured by weapons and wealth, he reminded us of something far greater: unity, dignity, and the will to fight for what is ours. And as the sun set over Ouagadougou, the world learned a lesson: you can silence a man, but you cannot silence a nation that refuses to kneel.